It's June the 4th, Friday, lunchtime, and everybody knows that that was the week time. Keith, late breaking news. It didn't even get into the newsletter, but it changes everything in tech, or perhaps doesn't change anything in tech, but nonetheless is a headline. What's happening on the Facebook front?
Yeah, so Facebook, after all of our conversations, Andrew, they haven't listened to you and they haven't listened to me. They've decided to ban Trump for 2 years, which of course is not banning him. It's probably suspending him, should be the word that's used, for 2 years. Obviously, everyone who thinks that Trump should never be allowed to publish again are not happy with this. And everyone who thinks that Facebook shouldn't be censoring at all are not happy with this. So one wonders who is happy with this, but it is what they've decided to do.
2 years. I'm not sure if Winston Churchill ever did a quote about 2 years in Silicon Valley. If he did, it would have been something like 2 years in Silicon Valley is like 2 centuries somewhere else. I don't know how they came up with that number, but I read something, well, it'll only be a year before the election, but they're basically banning him forever, aren't they? 2 years is such a long time.
Yeah, you wonder whether, as we get closer and closer today, 430, is it? No, 630. No, 730. Whatever 2 times 365 is. As we get closer to that date, one suspects that he'll be rebanned for another period of time.
And if he isn't, he'll manage to do something on the first day back. What do you think Trump's relative disappearance from the limelight and his being banned from Twitter and Facebook, what does that tell us about social media? Is it good or bad news, or no news?
I think ultimately it's no news, because I think if Trump wanted to be in the limelight and had the energy to make it happen, even when you're not on Twitter and Facebook, there's so many ways for a celebrity of his scale to get in front of news cameras and the media. So I suspect he hasn't got the appetite to be in our faces. I don't think it's to do with them.
Well, Trump may not be in the news. Facebook is in the news when it comes to Trump. Another of the social media platforms very much in the news this week is Twitter, who are taking on Clubhouse, or at least according to your newsletter, Keith. How is Twitter confronting Clubhouse?
Actually, Twitter, this is the story you're referring to. It's a story from TechCrunch. There were many people who covered this story, so I'm just using the TechCrunch one. But what Twitter is doing is actually really interesting. This particular story is about them turning on Twitter Spaces in the web version of Twitter and making it the central choice on the mobile version. So when you go to click the pencil icon or the feathered pen icon on mobile, if you keep your finger pressed down, a bunch of options come up, and the main option is to do a Twitter Space, which is an audio, Clubhouse-like audio experience. I actually was on one 2 Sundays ago, and it's very like Clubhouse. It's an exact copy.
Is anyone using it, or is it another one of Twitter's ghost towns?
No, the people are using it. The biggest user that I'm aware of is Kara Swisher, who does a show every week with Casey Newton using it, who we've talked about on the show a fair number of times because of his newsletter, which I've forgotten the name of his newsletter now. And, she's using it a lot. Robert Scoble is using it a lot.
Robert Scoble still exists.
He still exists, and so it is getting used. But unlike Clubhouse, it's just a feature of a wider set of features. And actually, the more interesting Twitter story is all the other features Twitter are now turning on. They bought a company called Scrollable this week, which is a way to read lengthy tweet streams more easily. They previously bought Review, which I use for my newsletter.
Is that any good? That's a Substack competitor.
Yeah. Well, they all are beginning to shine a light on Twitter's roadmap, which appears to be to give people like you and me the tools we need so that we can create an audience on Twitter, So it's about empowering the creators to enable them to have reach using various different media types to the listeners or viewers or readers. And I think it's really smart. And the first time I've really ever in my life thought Twitter had a coherent product strategy.
So how do we put this on Twitter? Why don't we do this on Twitter?
It is on Twitter right now. If you are listening to this on Twitter, please type a message into the chat. We'll put it on screen. It is on Twitter. By the way, because of Restream, we're on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube simultaneously.
Well, Facebook, coming back to Facebook, Facebook's been in a very public dispute. I mean, it's a broad intellectual dispute with Apple over the last few months about privacy and business models. It always seemed as if Facebook was going to lose that one because their business model is so much more troubling. But you have a piece in the newsletter this week which also shines light on Apple's business model, maybe not their formal business model, but their business, which is very troubling, I think.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. You use the word troubling because it wasn't in my head, but I'll think about that now. But what this story is looking at the last 10 years of Apple's supply chain looked at from the point of view of nation states. Who are the Apple suppliers? The blue is China, the red is Japan. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit to make this easy to see for people who watch this on video.
Yeah, well, it's clear that the point is that China is growing and everywhere else seems to be declining.
Well, yeah, apart from Taiwan, which is pretty flat, but Japan's declining, US is declining.
And the stories are, of course, that Apple is manufacturing some of its devices in slave labor camps. So I don't know whether your piece touches on that, but that's certainly very troubling. And it shows that Apple isn't quite the choir boy that Tim Cook presents it as.
My spectrum for looking at this story wasn't to judge Apple particularly, to be honest. It was more judging China's position in the world. So, because as you know, I strongly believe that China is going to be the leading manufacturing and assembling nation and the world's largest economy.
Well, I don't think that is a particularly original or controversial position, Keith. I mean, who would disagree with that?
You know, most of my American friends.
Yeah, but Americans are ignorant. They don't know what they're talking about. But normal people. I mean, nobody would deny that, right? Who would conceivably argue that China is not going to become the world's leading, as you put it, manufacturing? I mean, it already is, isn't it, as a manufacturing power?
Only in certain categories of manufacturing at this stage. The GDP of China, in absolute numbers, is still smaller than America's, but the GDP of China, when taking into account the cost of living, is much bigger than America's already. So,
well, let's name and shame some of your American friends who believe that China is not overtaking America.
You know, I'm on the Gilmore Gang every week. I just came off a Gilmore Gang show, which, by the way, everyone should watch. It's an awesome show. But I don't think any one of my other 5 colleagues on that show thinks of it this way at all.
Well, I will refrain from commenting on that. One category, one geographical category not included in that is Africa, Keith. We talked about Africa last week, and you've got another really interesting piece about Africa as the up-and-coming innovation hub for the innovation economy for startups in the world. What's happening in Africa this week?
Well, I put it in the newsletter just because when I pick up on themes, I like to pursue them and see how they
and you've got an Africa soft spot. Your wife's from there, and you've done a lot of traveling.
I love Africa. It's a very special place, but I don't think that really biases me towards it. Other than,
do you think that Steve Gilmore knows where Africa is?
I suspect he does, but probably that information would not be relevant to him in any way. But he probably does know where it is. But this is the story from this week. Last week you asked the question, where is the startup money going in Africa? Well, here's the answer. This is from Dowda Barry, who put together this map of where the money is going. And this was from a record making year of investment in startups in Africa. And the answer really is Kenya, Nigeria, and Egypt.
Yeah, I mentioned Kenya last week, and you poo-pooed that. You thought it was all in Nigeria.
Yeah, I was wrong. I can be wrong.
You can be wrong. And I'm interested in Egypt because it's such a repressive government. It's such an authoritarian state, and it's such a stagnant society. What's happening in Egypt? I think that would be an interesting conversation.
I think a lot of this is fintech, basically. For example, the biggest investment ever in Africa took place 2 weeks ago into what's called a challenger bank out of Egypt. That is like the Revolut or Monzo for the UK listeners of Egypt. So I think fintech and mobile infrastructure are the two biggest. And then there's ag tech, a lot of agricultural tech in Africa. Those are the three big ones. And the other story this week is from CNBC, looking forward, saying that 2021 is going to be another record year in Nigeria in particular. So Chipper Cash, which is a cross-border money transfer company, just announced a very, very large raise.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, we've heard that story before. I'm going to make the same joke as I made last week. There are no tigers in Africa, but tigers again lead the news. Your newsletter, and you seem to have an obsession with Tiger Capital. Why is Tiger so interesting and important, Keith? Because I still don't quite get their significance. I understand they're a big investor, but so what?
They're not just a big investor. They have $64 billion under management now. The only investor bigger than them is SoftBank with the Vision Fund, which was $100 billion.
Right. I buy that. But so what?
And this is Tiger eating all other late stage venture capitalists. So that raw meat you see there, that's Benchmark Capital, Andreessen Horowitz, and all the others. Tiger is basically, and I should just acknowledge Crunchbase here. Crunchbase wrote an article about Tiger, which was a lot more detailed than anyone has so far published. It's my wife and her editor wrote this. So I knew about it prior to it being published.
I thought you were going to say my wife and her husband.
Yeah, her husband didn't have anything to do with it. She keeps her cards close to her chest. But basically, they're now the world's biggest unicorn hunter. So the other red meat could signify.
So they're not eating the VCs; they're eating the unicorns, or they're catching the unicorns, I guess.
Well, both actually, because if they're catching them, someone else isn't.
So what's the background again of Tiger? Is it? It's not American money. Where's the money? Where's most of the $64 billion coming from?
Historically, they started mainly investing in Asia.
No, but where's the original? Where are they based, and where?
They're based in They're based in San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
But they originally started investing in Asia, and as they became successful, gradually migrated to the US as their center of gravity, and that's been the case now for a few years. Why is this interesting? It's interesting because, for me, because I believe that venture capital is highly disruptible. And here's somebody successfully.
Again, nobody would disagree with that either. It's obvious. Everything's.
But the interesting thing, Andrew, is it's never really been disrupted. It's like an artisan business where you get these individuals who claim to be good at picking companies, and that unless you give them your money, you'll lose it all because it's all about the individual insight. The truth is, it isn't. Tiger does no due diligence. It's all based on data analytics. And I'm actually trying to do the same thing for the seed stage with my Project Signal Rank corporation that we've talked about previously. I think you can disrupt venture capital using data analytics and capital allocation strategies that don't involve these, in quotes, smart individuals that are good at picking companies.
What about the global nature of Tiger? Where are they putting their money mostly?
Well, these days they're putting it into unicorns, and unicorns are heavily U.S. centric. Although Europe has got a few now, but it's really America first, China and Asia second, Europe third, and
And the
they
returns on the fund, do they compete with the earlier stage venture companies, the Benchmarks and the Andreessens?
they do, because it's really about let's take a single company through its journey, and you'll see. So, let's say we start a startup and we do a $5 million seed round with, let's say, Uncork Capital and Floodgate Ventures. They get the right to keep putting money in all the way through, called pro rata. But actually, they run out of money after about two rounds of financing. They haven't got any left. So their share becomes available to an Andreessen or a Sequoia or a Benchmark who do the next stage. They also get the right to keep investing. But then, the company keeps progressing, becomes a unicorn. Tiger steps in and offers to write a very big check at a very high valuation that everyone feels is expensive, and no one competes. So they then clear out all of those rights and own the Tiger's share of what's left. And they end up, when the company goes public or is sold, getting a return on capital instead of 2 to 3x, which would be normal for late stage investing. They're more like 10x.
And who are their, what are their home runs? What would our audience be familiar with in terms of Tiger's greatest successes in terms of investments?
I am going to pull up the list while you keep talking and keep everyone entertained. If you
Okay, well, pull it up, Keith.
Here it comes.
We're about to get the list of Tiger's greatest successes, but you better do it fast because I'm running out of things to say.
Tiger's greatest successes are, and it's a long list, by the way. Let me just tell you that they are in 30 unicorns, and they did 76 rounds of financing into those unicorns. And this is coming from my proprietary database that I have for Signal Rank. Here's the list of names in alphabetical order: Sixth Sense, Active Campaign, Ada, Adelaide, Attentive, Big ID, Bitso, BlockFi, which is a crypto play, Bright Health, Cred, Carter, Cedar, ChargeBee. I'll stop reading.
But let's go back to SoftBank, because you mentioned that they had the largest allocation of funds after SoftBank. Hasn't SoftBank been a disaster? Haven't they lost huge amounts of money?
That was a news item for a nanosecond about a year ago.
But not anymore. Are SoftBank now very profitable?
Yeah, they've recovered. They just announced their 100 billion fund is now over 120 billion in value, with lots of exits still to happen. And their second vision fund, which is another 100 billion, which they're doing from balance sheet, from their own money. Think about that. You get 100 billion of other people's money, you invest it, it makes a return. Now you have your own money, so you can now invest 100 billion yourself without raising any new money. Now it's all yours. You don't have investors anymore.
Well, I can't say I'm really sorry for the venture community. They're getting a taste of their own medicine. They've created this winner-take-all economy in media, in e-commerce, and now it's hitting their industry. So it's not really very surprising.
Well, yeah, the other thing, Andrew, and this is very important for me, is SoftBank is publicly listed. It's not a fund, it's a company. Seraphim, the UK fund, just announced it's going to publicly list, and Draper in the UK is a publicly listed fund. What I'm doing with Signal Rank is going to be a publicly listed fund in the seed space, working with all of the best seed managers. And the reason publicly listed is interesting is because it's not a fund, you don't distribute 80% of the profits to your investors. You keep them and reinvest them in the next cohort going forward. So the other great thing is investors who have an E-Trade account can buy your shares and participate in this early stage upside that is usually not available to them.
Well, you
So
mentioned that Tiger is San Francisco based, but SoftBank isn't. And with this consolidation in the industry, I know you had a piece in this week's newsletter about people leaving the Bay Area, San Francisco. Does this strengthen or weaken the Silicon Valley is in decline argument?
um, to me, I may be biased here, so my answer is going to be subjective and not scientific. But this is the story you're referring to. Techies are not moving to Miami; they're moving to Austin from Protocol, which is a great newsletter, by the way. I published this story mainly as a joke against Keith Rabois, who is telling everybody on his Twitter feed to move to Miami for the last 6 months. And the answer is they're not. They're going to Austin. So it was a bit of a joke. But to your serious question about the Bay Area, no, I don't think the Bay Area is in decline. In absolute terms, it's growing very fast. But other places are also growing now. So the relative balance is moving away from the Bay Area, but the Bay Area is still the single biggest component of the whole ecosystem.
And is the reason for the growth of Miami and Austin and other places, is it tax? Is it climate?
Yes.
Is it culture?
I think it's tax. And by the way, that's why I put this article in. Billionaires are racing to sidestep President Biden's plan to raise taxes. I don't think moving to Austin or Miami will achieve that because that's all about state tax. It is a tax reason, but it's state tax, not federal tax. I think the plan to sidestep Biden, and by the way, Biden today announced that he's prepared to compromise on corporate income tax in order to get the infrastructure deal through. So Biden may not stay the course on tax. But if he does, they're going to have to think of offshore solutions or maybe even losing their citizenship because the US is very, very good at collecting taxes.
Well, Keith, you're the only billionaire I know. Are you going to move?
I am not going to move. I'm going to pay my taxes like a good one.
And of course, if you were to move, Keith, my guess is you would buy a supersonic jet, which is the tweet of the week.
Isn't it interesting? This is the startup called Boom, which, by the way, Boom launched at TechCrunch Disrupt. I think it's the first airplane to be launched at TechCrunch Disrupt. And now, many years later, United Airlines has placed an order for 15 supersonic airliners. It is not without its complications. The US doesn't allow supersonic airliners to fly over land due to the boom that they make. So that would have to change. But you could fly from the East Coast to Europe or from the West Coast to Asia using one. And obviously, it would be very fast. So
well, you can fly from California to Europe as well. You just would have to go the long way around.
You'd have to go the long way around, which
you'd just fly over Canada. How much? First, two questions on this. Firstly, how imminent, and secondly, what kind of time saving is there? Say on San Francisco to London or New York to London.
Well, normal airplanes fly at 500 miles an hour. These ones can get up to 2,000 miles an hour, so it's 4 times faster. So instead of if it's a 10-hour flight from San Francisco to London, divided by 4, you're at 2.5.
And what will this mean to companies like Boeing or aerospace? Is it going to have an impact on the manufacturing economy, or the manufacturing economics of are they the Tesla of the airline industry?
They have Tesla-like elements. They are using sustainable fuels as well, incidentally. But I think the answer is no. I think what happens here, well, the first question is, will United make money?
Well, you know the answer to that is no, because United never make money with anything. And United is, with AT&T and various others, a pathetic company. It's never going to change. But
so I think it's the cost of the airplane and running it versus the much smaller number of passengers that it will carry.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't seem like United, or for that matter, any American airline player. I could see Singapore Airlines or one of the Middle Eastern airlines using these things?
Well, if anyone uses them, then the answer to your Boeing question is Boeing acquires Boom.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. And of course, this also speaks of the growing, and this has been a theme we always talk about every week, Keith, the globalization of the economy. If you can get from San Francisco to India or Israel, or certainly China in, I don't know, what, 4 or 5 hours, it makes all the difference. It suddenly means that the San Francisco to Beijing flight is about the same distance as San Francisco to New York.
Yep, exactly. Well, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that matters post COVID? Do you think is face to? I actually had the experience this week. I spoke to a colleague who was in India, just recovering from COVID, actually, who I was discussing Signal Rank with, and he said, "I still like to meet face to face. I'm coming to New York. Can we meet?" And that's like a personal preference. So I still think there will be face to face, but I think
Yeah,
it
well, that's
will.
yeah. I think that face to face will. Well, I think this whole COVID thing in a couple of years it will seem as if nothing happened. That's my sense. I don't think it's changed very much of anything. I mean, it's obviously been good for Zoom and everyone else and for Amazon, but I think things are just going to get back to normal. I think it's been exaggerated, the impact, unless you're obviously tragically, if you lose your life or you lose the life of a loved one or you lose your job, but it hasn't really affected tech people. I mean, if anything, it's been good for the tech community.
It's been good. For me, I think where the bar is for face to face versus remote
Well, you
versus
like the bar,
virtual.
Keith, don't you?
Yeah, I like the bar. The bar has moved. I would travel quite easily in the past. Now I'll be quite happy to use remote connections up until the point where face to face it really feels necessary. So I definitely will travel less for meetings than I did before, but I won't stop it altogether.
Well, some things never change. Your startup of the week could have been startup of the week 5, 10, 15 years ago. Another photo sharing app. Surely we don't need another one, Keith. What's happening on the photo sharing app front?
So this is the number one app in the App Store for 2 weeks in a row, Paparazzi, which I think I don't know if it's a really bad name or a really good name, but it's a memorable name,
Yeah,
Paparazzi.
that's not bad for a. I mean, it's bad, but the field is bad, so by definition, it's good.
So they raised a Series A of 20 million, which is a big number. So it's a bit of a paparazzi number.
Yeah.
And it basically blocks the camera pointing to yourself. So it doesn't allow selfies. And it forces you to only take pictures of things in front of you. And it is not like a prolific sharer either. So it's an interesting sociological study.
Too much money, not enough ideas. Surely we don't need that.
Well, we probably didn't need Instagram that put filters
Well, we
on.
did. Instagram changed everything. I mean, there was no Instagram culture or economy before Instagram. But paparazzi, when are they going to photograph us, Keith? Are we paparazzi types?
Well, I think it isn't meant to be chasing celebrities. It's meant to be. It's actually a human thing. It's saying focus on what's in front of you, not on yourself. Stop sharing pictures of yourself and start sharing pictures of what you're experiencing. So it's meant to be a kind of a Gen Z or Y or X. I always get mixed up. Kind of worthy app that is less self-obsessed. It can't be Gen Y because they are self-obsessed. So it must be the other ones.
I'm always very suspicious of New York Times best-selling books. Often they are engineered. There's a lot of corruption in the book business. What about when it comes to the App Store? Do you think that you can pay to become number one for a couple of weeks and then ride off that for years? I don't mean pay, but I mean spend so much on marketing that it's almost inevitable.
You can. My app Just.me back in 2014 was number one in quite a lot of app stores around the world.
Look what
Now
happened to that.
it ended up being just me.
I have to say that I have more faith in Tiger Global than in paparazzi.
I agree.
So it's a slow week, Keith. Why has nothing big happened? Why are we talking about paparazzi and not interesting stuff?
You know, the week is what it is. That's why the show's called That Was the Week. And some weeks That Was the Week is eye poppingly good, and other weeks the week is snooze fest.
Well, I
Not
hope we
good.
haven't made the audience snooze. That was the week for June 4th. My prediction, and interesting chat. My prediction is June 11th. Something big is about to happen. We're in the pre-earthquake stage now of tech. So this time next week, Keith, we'll be talking about perhaps the merging of what? Facebook and Google?
Yeah, very good prediction, Andrew. Remind me not to invest in your next idea.
Yeah. Or my previous idea. Well, have a great week, Keith. And that was the week for June 4th. Lots of interesting stuff. Tiger Global, Tiger Global, Tiger Global. At least we didn't talk about Paul Graham. Have a great week, and we'll all talk next week.
Thank you, the famous Andrew Keen.